So good morning, dear community. Shall we start this morning in the classical way with the 3 sounds of the bell to help us all to come back to our body and mind. I know for many of us, we came early, about 15 minutes early, and I was just really enjoying how everyone came and enjoyed this these moments together in silence. And I felt there was no, I don't know if there's no expectation, but I felt, quite a peaceful energy when I walked into the hall earlier, and then as well as a little bit closer to this session. And it was such an experience that I haven't seen in conferences. So I hope you all enjoy it, this community time together, enjoying periods of silence, periods of connection, not through words, ideas, or notions, but just presence. So with the 3 sounds of the bell, we can enjoy further. Thầy says, each sound of the bell, we can enjoy at least three breaths. So we can enjoy at least nine breaths together, listening to the 3 sounds of the bell. Good morning, community. Today is the 23rd of June, the year 2025, and we are sitting in Lower Hamlet, the Assembly of Stars Meditation Hall. This morning's session is called The Art of Unknowing. At least that was the title we agreed on about a month or so ago. I don't know how much of that conversation we still recall, but I was just looking over my notes this morning, and I saw the name, The Art of Unknowing. So this morning we have a conversation on how the ways we actually see kind of shape the worlds that we live in. I think that's, I haven't really asked for their consent on this theme of the conversation, but that's where we're going. And so maybe today we ask the question about what happens when we meet the present moment with curiosity, humility, and embodiment or embodied presence. And I think so this morning we're joined by 3 remarkable human beings who, in one way or another, their work touches on this subject. How the way we see really shapes our world, and how, with curiosity, humility, embodiment, a lot of other elements as well. So. Right next to me is Professor Jorge Hirsch. I'm going to say their last names. In case you're interested, you can Google. Professor Jorge, he has spent over 4 decades probing quantum matter, and he reminds us of the limits of scientific knowledge. In our conversation, I think over Zoom, he said something that stuck with me. He said, 96% of the universe is unknown. Maybe sometimes scientists feel it's a little bit less, but for me, the number is a lot higher than 96%. So, yeah. He will talk about maybe how our tools, metrics, and narratives are never neutral, and they color what we can know, hopefully. And then next to Jorge is, in the middle center, is Dr. Mark Miller. He is a philosopher and also a cognitive scientist. And his research asks how a prediction-hungry brain meets an unpredictable world. Is that kind of summarized? So it's a very interesting topic, and hopefully Mark can introduce more to us this morning about that. And then last we have Danielle Kredikov. She's into design and AI. AI empathy, something like that. Our expert on AI on the panel, and I know many of us are interested in AI and what's going on with AI and et cetera, et cetera. Some are asking, what do the monastics feel about AI? And so we might explore some of that this morning as well. And she founded Google's Empathy Lab, and asking questions like, can technology feel? You can correct me later. Yeah. And I think I also remember in our conversation that you said AI is not a fixed brick, but treating AI not as a fixed brick, but as malleable clay that is shaped by our intuition, bias, and heart. So this is where we're going with our conversation this morning. How does heart play? How does our consciousness, how does the way we see inform our science or shapes our world? And maybe we can start with Jorge. No? Yes, okay. Yes. Could you talk a little bit about your work at the university and how you've been, being exposed to spirituality, the practice, Plum Village tradition, how you have navigated the two, bringing spirituality into your scientific inquiries and endeavors?
Okay, I am really moved to be here by this invitation to be here. And, I have been working in quantum physics for nearly 4 decades. And I was thinking that I expected science, and in particular physics, to provide me certainties, answers. As a teenager, I was looking that in other areas in the social change, and when I left that, I thought that physics would give me that. And after working on that, I realized that, okay, I am good at doing, I can make a living doing this work, publishing works, teaching, mentoring, but I don't get answers, deep answers. I just publish articles, attend conferences where other people publish articles. And then I slightly started to realize that it is just that I needed to let go the idea that we can predict the future or we can control the future. And for me it was difficult. I have this fantasy, and I think it was also kind of supported by the expectation or even the discourse that scientists will help us to control, to model the future, and to be with the uncertainty was challenging, really, to let go, and what do you do with that? But slowly I understood that this idea, which somehow, for example, when I studied, and I see many colleagues still repeat these concepts, but when you listened to the experts, for example, to realize that more than a century ago, people in classical physics realized that chaos is everywhere. And chaos, it means, it is a technical word in many areas of science, and means that very tiny changes in the initial conditions imply that you cannot predict at a long time. Like with weather, we never know if it is going to rain or not. But, you know, the problem is when we teach, we always want to teach simple things. So, even in physics course, you never talk, usually, perhaps some had the chance, but usually you never talk about classical chaos, this impossibility to predict. And it is everywhere in economics, in social science, because it is technically related with what is called nonlinear systems, which are the math you use to try to describe things. So you use math to describe things and see that the math tells you, and you can calculate that, this impossibility to predict, and say, wow. Then why I was not aware of that? I was teaching many years, because it is outside the textbooks. And many of us tend to believe that what is in the textbook is reality. And I needed this practice to open my eyes and say, no, look, how many things, how many nice things are here which are not in the textbooks and not in any discourse. It is far more rich, but at the same time far more uncertain. So we need to touch that. And then, if you work in quantum physics, then there, at the core of quantum physics, is probability, is randomness, and there it goes a step further. So many people say in my community that it is not that we have no enough information. It is that it is impossible in principle to predict. And you know, at the same time, it shocks the basics of philosophy, because it is saying there is no cause. There are effects, but you don't know. Something happened. You have many possibilities, and some of them at a given moment take place, and the other not. And this is what we observe, and at the same time it is kind of, it is unsettling, but at the same time this is what all our friends working in quantum computer have the advantage of using that. So people have managed to say, okay, if this is what it works, let's try to take benefit of that, exploit that thing. So many people are exploiting this, but at the same time there is this uncertainty. Okay, so I cannot predict, I don't understand, so how do I manage to do that? And I think and at some moment obviously also for some different very personal reason, I was really kind of depressed, disappointed. And then I found a wonderful person, she's my wife now, and she introduced me to the practice. And when I asked her, why are you meditating? What is it for? And she answered, no, I cannot tell you. If you want, try. And it worked incredibly well. And then I started exploring that, and I realized, okay, yes, I have suffering, but yes, but I will not disappear in this suffering, and I can stay with this suffering. And I touch the first aspiration when I asked to receive the 5 mindfulness training, my 5 mindfulness trainings. My aspiration were to cultivate compassion and joy, because I really needed both of them. And I received this name, Compassionate Joy of the Heart. And so, wow, that's so nice. And then the next thing I realized is that my happiness and my suffering are not disconnected from the other people. And so that's why I'm now wearing this brown jacket, which means I decided to go deeper in this practice. And I'll also have a meditation group in the Nuclear Science Institute at the National University in Mexico. And it is incredibly nice to be able to share this way of being in the world.
So, thank you, Professor. I'll just call you Jorge for now, okay? Or friend. So I know many of you are new, and we have not had the any sharings about the 5 mindfulness trainings. So just for your curiosity, the 5 mindfulness trainings are, you can say, the Buddhist vision for global ethics, for global spirituality and ethics. And we will explore a little bit more about those, I think, tomorrow, in a session tomorrow afternoon. It's really about how to apply mindfulness in the different areas in our lives, whether it's relationships or consumption or aspirations, things like that. I think what would be interesting is if after each one of you share, then we can do a reflection conversation. I think, I don't know if you have a question, Mark. You do? Okay.
I do, yeah.
Fantastic.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. I'd like to hear, it was wonderful to hear you speak, my goodness. I would love to hear how your scientific insights have impacted your Dharma training, and maybe also how your meditative training might also feed back into your scientific insights, or maybe they don't. I assume they do.
Let's see. I think I have let go the idea that I have a particular goal in my research. So I am blessed having graduate students and undergraduate students and collaborators. So I try to be as open as I can in my collaborations and let them guide me. And for some reason it works. So at the end we always publish articles and they graduate, and so this is kind of a measure of success. And my impression is this. For example, when I teach, what is important for me when teaching is to tell the students that one thing are the techniques, but it will be useful for them to learn if they want to become physicists. So they study relativity, quantum physics, but I try to show them that there is no one description of reality, that there are many, many different ways. And perhaps one thing which I think it is very important from me, from the quantum physics side, is that there is, there is no agreement at all in the interpretation of quantum physics after a century of having it working. But I think there is reasonable agreement that in one word, which is contextuality, which means everything you do is contextual. There are not, and I think this is so close to interbeing. It is, and this idea, which also was in the title of this panel, which was entanglement, which is kind of a magic word, and it received the Nobel Prize 3 years ago. And this entanglement means exactly this. And we don't know why, but what happens in a measurement there is not independent of what happened in the measurement right on the other side, and can be on the other side of the world. Literally, they have done experiments between Beijing and Vienna, and they see that. So we don't know why it happens, but it happens. And I don't think this is necessary. It don't need to be the same contextuality we have in all the other areas. We have contextuality in language, in the meaning of, but I think it just helps us to see that contextuality is everywhere, that isolated systems which are useful sometimes to describe some things are that looking at things sometimes is useful to look at this chair as different of this one, and it is useful, but at the same time, so I think this is what helps me in the direction from quantum physics to my spiritual practice. And the spiritual practice essentially, I think, has helped me to be able to see all the privilege I have, which are very difficult to see. The privilege you are usually blind to our privilege. And to recognize them, to be grateful, and to try to be a better human being. But for that I needed first to realize that it was possible for me. This is part of the free will. That yes, I can be more kind. And this was not obvious for me. But okay, my parents were not. Why I should behave different? And then with the practice, I realized, oh yes, I can smile, and the other people also smile. Wow, this works.
I think for me, something that came up in your initial sharing, I find a bit of a paradox, because you spoke about uncertainty and how so much of the work that you do, it kind of points in the direction of uncertainty. And then I find it quite, I don't know, just looking at what is happening now, and particularly related to mindfulness, that everything needs to be scientifically backed up, or something like that. So I'm just, a curiosity is coming up in my mind, where there's so much uncertainty in science, and yet everything needs to be validated by scientists or backed by science, like mindfulness that is scientifically proven and backed and things like that. And I just find it a bit of a paradox, maybe. So and I find for me, I've been looking into the problem of outsourcing validation. It's kind like we need science to prove how we feel or validate how it is that we feel. If we're depressed or something, we may feel we may feel a certain way, and yet we need a psychotherapist to like put the stamp, you are depressed, or something like that. But whereas with mindfulness, with our awareness, we know something, and yet we need that diagnosis to say, oh yes, to confirm I am something like that. And I don't know how it is in the. Is it a problem of communications? How can we communicate our work, our findings in such a way that my concern is how do we communicate our insights, our findings in such a way that we don't take away the agency of the human being. And I think that's also, in the spirit, in our world, in the monastery, and how we share the teachings too. It's like we share it in such a way that doesn't make you dependent on us for spirituality, but that you become the teacher yourselves. So I think that was a little bit of what came up for me in your sharing, and I don't know how both of you process that or see that.
What I was really enjoying as you were speaking, especially into uncertainty and the kind of like this gesture constantly coming up of like, it reminded me of Brother Foplin yesterday speaking about, are you sure? But I feel like the instruments of our understanding are so much more mysterious than we pretend they are. And the strange thing about the sciences is they gesture at the world as if it's a big Venn diagram, when in fact we find in practice it's a circle. Like you speak of entanglement and interbeing, these are the same insight. Actually, so much of deep spiritual insight is science so old we forget it's science. We call it wisdom, but it's like the OG science. It's like thousands of years of meticulous insight. And something I really enjoy about the quality of this conversation is the papers or the things that are published, or I think of the periodic table or the drawing of the atom. But in fact, Mendeleev was like struggling with how to describe the elements, and he fell asleep on his desk and had a dream that they were all just laid out on a table. And that was how that came to be. And Bohr couldn't figure out how to explain the nature of an atom. He like had this sense of it, but like couldn't figure out how to like get it in this realm. And he had a dream that he was sitting on the sun while all the planets went around him. And then he kind of stole that from like the universe and was like, wait, I think that makes sense to describe the nature of atoms. So it's this like question of how do we come to describe the nature of things? Like I was watching you, like deep in the practice of science as you pour the tea, right? What I was watching you pour each one, titrating each teacup, then pouring the water. And I was like, Chado, like the way of tea. There is a way to this. And that way is the essence, and the observation of that essence is like the marrow of it, not the measurement. So it's this funny thing where we tend to like bias towards the measurement because it feels comforting, when in fact it's like, it's the dream that helps us see clearly. It's the marrow that helps us know ourselves. And I feel like, so when I think about the way science lives in us, or lives in our way of seeing the world, or lives in our practice, it's like inherently revelatory and miraculous. It's like, oh, like the aha moment is like, oh, I see this clearly. And then there's something about the like, now I need to do the proof and the blah, 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 that some of that can get lost. I love that you described entanglement as magical. There's like, oh yes, that like, that it maintains the integrity of that original insight. Like my brother, who is a scientist, used to describe, he was a mathematician and math, I'm glad y'all got math covered because I'm terrible at math. He used to describe, one of our common love languages around science was, we would call it the great math in the sky. We use the same thing to describe spirituality. It's like this invisible, well, I could use the language of one of my incarnations, which is, it's this invisible recipe or algorithm for being that lies within all things. But the question is whether we choose to call that mystery or mindfulness. Like I love that Thầy says mindfulness is the Holy Spirit. Mindfulness is, it's like everything falls into this description because it's everything that's present in the field in any moment, which of course is entirely boundless and contains everything. And for me, I feel like my only way to touch quantum physics is through that place. Otherwise, if I go the other doorway, one of the other gathas, like the math gatha, is like, this is close to you, lady. Anyway, all a wandering way to say that I appreciate like the capacity to expand the aperture to like, science can be so impoverished in its language, to like expand the language we use for it so that it includes so much more of our genuine experience.
I'd love to get more into language, but I think, well, just a little bit. I think yesterday in Brother Fiblin's Dharma talk, he mentioned how we speak in describe ourselves in terms of computer language, and how we describe how a computer operates. We begin to use that in describing our experiences. And I found it quite interesting because I felt in the beginning when people were trying to describe computers, they were describing it in terms of human terms, like the computational power of a computer is actually what they were trying to describe humans doing. And kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, but then suddenly it becomes externalized, and then you make it a thing, and then you, it's kind of like this mirroring effect. Suddenly now the computer mirrors the human now, rather than the human mirroring the human mirroring the computer rather than the computer mirroring the human. So I don't necessarily think that we are just describing ourselves in the computer, but just trying to remember our original aspiration of describing the computer in human terms, something like that. Anyhow, that's my bit on language. I don't know if you want to add anything, because Mark is into cognitive science, so he will have something to say about this. I don't know if you want to introduce your work at the same time.
Exactly. That's that's actually such a nice segue, because I'm a computational contemplative scientist. So I'm doing everything in computational terms, which is lovely. You don't want to confuse the map for the terrain. That's certainly true. And when we say computation, we don't necessarily mean that the human brain is a computer, like it's a Mac or an iPhone, but that you can, right? It's not that. But we often have that mistake. You think, oh, computation, that's got to be a bad word when we're thinking about brains, because brains are organic. We heard Brother Faplin so clearly direct us towards that insight, and that's completely true. And yet we can talk about the information processing in various dynamical systems, like a brain, using that phraseology, using computation, and that's what I do. So I'm a senior researcher at Monash University at the new Consciousness and Contemplative Studies Center, which is one of the premier science of meditation labs in the world. And so I get to do this as a job, which is incredible. Thank you for letting me speak. I can't believe I'm up here with such lovely, wonderful humans. Right, so what I might say, I've got about 15 minutes, and I have a lot I want to transmit to you that's really exciting. We're in a revolution right now in cognitive science. I don't know if you know this, but we've had one idea about the brain, one idea about the mind for a long time in science. Like since Descartes, 300 years ago, we got some biases put in, like that there's a soul up here in the brain, and then the rest is just, you're just driving the body around. That was a pitch 300 years ago, and we didn't have any tech to actually look at the brain. I say to my students all the time that the ghost of Descartes is haunting. What is this? Are you? Translation. Oh, you need me to slow down. That's going to be challenging. This is me in my natural habitat. Okay. Here we go. So we're in a revolution. Is that better? Yeah? Okay. This is the Plum Village pace. We're in a revolution in cognitive science. Okay? Today we're starting to reconceptualize what the mind might be, and it's incredibly fruitful for also thinking about the Dharma, thinking about spiritual development. Again, you don't want to confuse the map for the terrain, but rather than my scientific agenda pulling me away from my spiritual practice, I'm looking at the various ways that we can use cognitive science to think about spiritual practice. Can we understand it better? And can our insights from science inform our Dharma practice? And can we use Dharma practitioners and the Dharma to inform our science? And that's my agenda. So let me tell you about this revolution. I want to blow your mind for a minute, okay? For a long time, we thought the brain was a passive organ. The brain just sits in the head, waiting for information from the world. When information comes from the world, let's say light comes from the light, it hits my eye, and then the brain takes that information and it processes it from simple up through complex. The end product is your experience of the world with light in it. That's still what the textbooks say because this is so new. It's new, but it's not fringe. I want you to be clear about this, okay? I'm not pitching a fringe idea. This is now the preeminent idea, but it's new. Okay, it's newish. And that's completely wrong. So if you thought that that's the way that the perceptual system works, I'll get you to show me hands. I sometimes do that, but you already know the bit. So I expect nobody to put their hand up. But if I said, is that how you think the perceptual system works? You might say, yes, I think yes. Light comes into the eye, brain processes that information, you see the world. It's completely wrong. It's completely wrong, okay? Instead, here's the new pitch. The brain isn't passive at all. It's radically proactive. The brain and nervous system are radically proactive. They're not waiting around for anything. What the brain and nervous system evolved to do is figure out how it is in the world. Already, do you feel the spiritual touch point there? You were built to figure out how it works. We're spiritual aspirants by our very biological substructure, okay? You are built to figure out how it works. The brain and the nervous system evolved for you to figure out how the world works. Then it uses that model of how things work to build for itself from the top down what it expects to happen next. And the experience you have of your world is your expectation for what you think is happening. Okay? So if that didn't, yeah, you guys, I love talking with people like this. Are you kidding me? Everybody's already smiling and nodding, so you get it. But let me lay it down again. Okay? Because if it didn't make you feel a little bit sick to your stomach, you didn't catch it, okay? You're not seeing the light according to this new framework, okay? You're seeing your own best guess about what's happening right now, which includes light phenomenon. Light from the world, your brain doesn't wait around to process that. It predicts the experience you're having right now, and it uses information from the world in order to update those models so that the model you have so that this virtual reality that you're generating, that is actually your experience, sometimes we call it a controlled hallucination, is your perception, okay? You want that to chug alongside reality, of course. You don't want your hallucination to pull too far away from reality, and actually all of our work right now is on when you have model drift, when your belief substructures, when your brain and nervous system, the models that you're engendering, when they drift away from reality, you get sick. So we think that pathology might just be articulable as model drift away from reality. If that's true, then flourishing, well-being, in very simple terms, might be model consolidation, where your model of the world gets much closer to the real world stuff, as close as it can, and it's never perfect, but it can be closer. Now, isn't that wonderful? That to be sick is to lose touch with reality, to be well is to come back close to reality, and that's coming right from first principles in neuroscience, computational neuroscience today. Isn't that wonderful? I hope you're already feeling it. When I publish on this, I just feel like I feel like the Buddha in some heavenly realm, smiling and saying, "Yeah, very good," right? Because already, if you're in the know, then you can feel it. Ideas of emptiness and fabrication are native here. We were already hearing from Brother Phap Lin about this. God, it was so hard not to get involved while Brother Phap Lin was talking, because I just wanted to keep being like, hallelujah, this is exactly what we think. Where he says, we construct our experience, and I'm thinking, yes, exactly. And our feelings and our habits are the things that build up our experience of the world. And I think, exactly. Now, just here's an important thing I'd like to transmit, and I'd like you to have. If this is true, and we think it is, or it's true-ish, it's truer than the last model. Okay, we're not at the end of science, but it's truer, okay? But if it's true, this is one thing we can take. Your beliefs really matter then, because the beliefs that you have, that's the shape of your model, that's the thing that constructs your reality. So it's not like you're living in a world, and then I have some beliefs, but who cares what they are? It's not that. The structure, the belief, the hierarchy of beliefs that you engender, the things that you think about the world, the people you spend time with, where you put your attention, where you set your intention, that modulates the models that you have that then are used to construct your reality. That is your reality. So if you're scrolling, doom scrolling 8 hours a day, and you think, no, it's no big deal. I'm Mark, I'm over here, there's an objective world out there. It doesn't matter if I doom scroll 6 hours a day. It actually, right through the lens of this framework, it fundamentally matters, because what you're doing is you're augmenting the system that then predicts what is happening next, and that gets baked right into your experience. Okay? So, do I have any more time? Okay, one more thing. Okay, you with me so far? The brain is a prediction engine, okay? The experiences you have of the world are your own best guess about the world. Those guesses are built on the things you believe about the world, okay? This is why we can have optimists and pessimists who live in very different worlds. You have an optimist and a pessimist both, walk down here today, and you say, well, how was your walk? Well, none of you are going to be in the pessimist category, I suspect. Oh, maybe you do. We'll say, how was the walk? And what do we expect to happen? They live in very different realities, right? Now, we can explain that using these first principles. The pessimist is going to say, wow, there were ticks everywhere. It's too hot. My feet hurt. This is my experience of coming here. And the optimist is going to say, wow, gosh, I had 45 minutes walking in silence. It was beautiful. Ticks are such lovely little creatures. I mean, we know this thing already. We know it in our hearts that this is true. It's just, we have some scientific validation, why do we need that? I don't know. I feel like maybe we got burned by religion for a minute, and we're trying to find we're trying to find our way back. We're trying to find our way back, and so it helps to ground these things. There's evidence that says if you show people a brain on a slide, they're 90-something% more likely to believe you. So I always start all of my lectures with a big brain on a slide. I'm hacking the matrix. I wanted to give you one more thing, okay? Prediction system, beliefs matter, okay? We want to practice in ways that help our model get closer to reality that makes us well. That's mindfulness. Intention and attention. If you want to talk about this, I would love to talk about it over lunch. I only have a few minutes left, but intention and attention are exactly the mechanisms that we think you can use to start selecting which information you want to impact your model so that your model is better going forward. It comes, the tradition here is that verbatim. You can only change it in the present moment by selecting better information, and you can use intention and attention to select that information, which changes the model, which changes your reality. So if you don't like your reality, it might not be reality's fault. This is right from the science, isn't that lovely? It might be that the lens through which you're seeing reality, the construction process, needs an update. Now here's the last thing I want to transmit, okay, you ready? Fear prevents model update. Why? Why? Because if you're scared shitless, then you don't have any free resources to try something new. The model, there's a mathematical model here, okay? But the basic idea is that if you're scared, if the world is suddenly too uncertain, the system will lock down into the things that it's learned are the ones that keep it alive better. Yeah, it'll lock into the beliefs that have worked in the past across a lot of different terrains. Fear stops the system from updating. And a healthy model has to be constantly updating because the world is always changing and you're always changing. You can't stop anywhere. That's impermanence. That's the insight into impermanence here. Can't stop anywhere. You get sick. You want model update. Okay? Fear prevents model update. If you want people to change, you can't scare them. If you want to impact climate change, you can't scare people. I want to just have that be here right from first principles. If people are afraid, then they lock. They can't update. They need to be brave. They need to feel safe in order to go back into flow. And we just have first principle models of that right now. So if you think the best way forward is to tell people doomsday scenarios and you scare them, we're actually seeing right from this framework that they lock and stop changing. What you need to do is make people feel safe, give them a hope, and give them a practice, and then they can enter the flow states that allow them to update optimally again. Now, again, I just want to close. The map isn't the same as the terrain, so I'm talking in computational terms, but I hope what I've done here, what I hope I could do, is to share with you how some of the computational neuroscience language might be inspirational and spiritual also, rather than just avoiding it. Because I think there's a lot of benefit from thinking about the nervous system and the brain in computational terms. And this is just some of what's coming out of our research. And we're applying this right now to all sorts of really interesting studies. We study Christians who speak in tongues. We're running the first serious scientific exploration of the jhanas. Do you guys know what jhanas are? Absorption states, Buddhism, yeah. So we're going to all over Southeast Asia and in the United States, putting monastics in EEGs and looking at altered states. It's amazing. Maybe just one more thing and then I'm going to be quiet. Part of our talk here today is how does science meet spirituality? I just want to say one more. We love monastics. Oh my God. Now, of course, when you look at a monastic brain, you're looking at a very special brain, so there's some confounds here, okay? But the wonderful thing is that you can put a monastic in a scanner, and then they have, this is the best, because they actually know what they're doing in their own minds. When you put just a layperson in a scanner, and then you say, look, I want you to think about a cat, okay? And then they come out 20 minutes later, and you say, well, how long did you think about a cat? Just, you tell me right now, and you're all contemplative, so you're better at this. But think about like your family who don't practice. Will they be able to think of a cat for 20 minutes in a giant magnetic machine that bangs at them? And then do they have any idea what they've been thinking about for 20 minutes? So they come out and say, yes, I was thinking about a cat for 20 minutes. You think, great, then I've got all the evidence I need. And who knows what they were thinking about? They don't know. I don't know. You put a monastic in a scanner, though, and you say, do this thing. They're like, yep. You're like, whoa, we could actually look at it, huh? So we have these monastics who do these jhana, these altered states, and they just click a button when they go into these altered states. That's so sharp. They're just like, okay, here we go. and done. You're like, whoa, so good data. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Sorry, that was too fast.
I really appreciate the ringing of the bell or inviting the bell in that moment. How's that? I was appreciating the invitation of the bell, because otherwise my natural inclination would have been like, yo, how do I follow that? Well, I'm supposed to be the machine intelligence lady. But I very much appreciate, Mark, how you brought us into this new dawning of an understanding of intelligence that is inherently, really what you were describing is the neurobiological state of presence. Presence isn't some hand-wavy thing. We know this because we're here in this way, but it's a neurobiological state of coherence, connection, groundedness. And intelligence, as you described, is inherently social. Intelligence is what arises from being together, and that is human intelligence, that is more than human intelligence. And so when we look at models of intelligence now, so much of it is about what are the many forms of intelligence that we can include in the modeling. I think AI can be, literally, again, impoverished language, artificial intelligence is like not great on the terminology there. Like, that's terrifying terminology. There's like the Hollywood industrial complex that has also made AI terrifying. But in terms of the work that I've kind of endeavored towards for quite a while, it's how do we look at the first kind of early forms, the building blocks of intelligence, with what I'll borrow James Bridle's terminology, which is an ecology for technology. How do you look at it ecologically? How do you look at it as this system of, to use the language of our tradition, interbeing? How do we start models of intelligence that organize from that place? And we look at a lot of the AI around us right now, and it's one-on-one modeling. It's one person talking to one machine, and it's this very strange loop there. And it's a language loop, which has its own biases. And yet the really interesting thing about machines and machine intelligence, of course, is that machines contain many non-machine parts, which are from us, which are from the world as we know it, which are from our direct experiences. All of the descriptions of the kind of known world from all angles of our experience are part of that corpus of understanding. So it's just so interesting to think about all of the non-machine elements in machines. And then, Sister, you spoke the other day of how when we're on machines, often we forget we're in a body. We kind of start to have these machine elements in us. And so this description of what is intelligence and what is it to be with machines, what is it to design an ecosystem of intelligence that feels a bit more like Miyazaki, that's like this grammar of animacy, where there's this spirited sense of what it is to be surrounded by things that expand and enhance. You know, folks have often, one of the people in my intellectual lineage who I worked for a long time is Steve Jobs. He used to speak about how computers were bicycles for the mind. And it's like the wheels become the way that we move ourselves. Or my husband was a caregiver for a teacher who he used to talk about himself when he was at his best with that teacher. He was his arms and legs. And I think of these systems of care and being where we come into a communion that is larger than the individual. This extension where we get to participate in and feel that. It's almost like I live in Hawaii, where the humidity of the air helps you lose the sense of where your body begins and ends. And I think sometimes losing a sense of where our body begins and ends can be this path of ill-being, this disconnection of the model from reality, of where we start to go down the path that isn't quite right. But there's also a sense of losing where we begin and end that actually deeply connects us. And one of the sciences, for myself, I would say in my practice, it's also deeply collaborative, because that's the only way I ever understand anything, is through relationship with other people and making. It's what reveals itself between that I trust, or in listening to people that I feel like I have some compass of what to make. But there's this kind of relationality there that I think is so present in intelligence. And when that's reflected in models, they feel very different to us, because they kind of, without needing to tell us how to be with them, they work with the grain of our being, they work with the fabric of our being. And so I didn't talk about my work, but very briefly, I was, a very long time ago, I was born, and my father is a neurosurgeon, or was a neurosurgeon, my mom an artist and nurse, and all of that ancestry became these lungs and these bones and this being. And for the longest time, I tried to make sense of how those things were whole. They weren't like separate hemispheres of the brain or fields of industry. And my practice became, how are those the same language? How am I speaking? How am I whole in myself? And what I found as I came to figure out, I was like studying philosophy, and my dad was like, she's going to drive taxis. Like, what is she going to do? And as I was figuring out what to do by having no idea what to do, and just kind of Alice in Wonderlanding my way into it, I found myself working at Apple and working on system design and working on the iPhone, and thinking it was just so incredible and was going to be the best thing. And then between launching the iPhone and the iPad, my brother had his second bout of cancer. And it was like a month into what I thought was the coolest job ever. It was so shiny. It was like full of unicorns. And I was so excited to be at Apple, because it felt like this dwelling place of artists and inventors. And I was like, I'm home. And then I found out my brother was dying. And he was a computer scientist. And it was this strange thing where I was like, where does his life fit with my life? And what am I doing? And this is really cool, but like the bottom fell through everything. And I love something that Trungpa Rinpoche said, which is, he was like, I'm gonna butcher this, but he basically said, like, the horrible or the insane feeling is like you're falling, and you just don't know when you're going to hit ground. But the good news is that there is no ground. And I felt that way in that moment. And Steve Jobs, who I was working for at the time, was also dying of cancer. So I watched my brother and I watched Steve dissolving in front of me, just liquefying as we were making these things. And what I found myself always sitting with and turning towards, it's the reason I needed a practice, was how do we acknowledge that all of that is true? How am I not just making a thing that everybody's gonna like get sucked? I mean, like, we did not know that was gonna happen with the phone. Sorry. I was like 28 at the time, like, it can only be good news. And then by the iPad, we were like, let's be a little more careful. But being confronted with impermanence, and I love, one of the phrases of Zen that I love so much is that Zen is being most intimate. And there's something about the cancer of my brother and my boss, who's supposed to be this like larger than life Joseph Campbell human, but I'm watching him in the cafeteria every day dissolve in conversation with his friend as he tries to leave his mark. And to watch a man do that is an extraordinary privilege. To watch him have trouble walking and to see my brother do the same and to hold him and to be coming alongside both of those journeys while making something that is hopefully going to be useful. And so that was an encounter with a level of intimacy that just struck me to the depths of my heart, to the depths of my marrow. I would literally come home from work and be like on the floor with my dog, just trying to breathe. And then we'd like go out and like all the shiny things. And so by the time I got to Google, I was supposed to be working at X, doing all the weird self-driving cars and space elevators and working with all these planetary-sized brains. And at that point, my brother had died, and so had Steve. And a year after joining, because my head kind of exploded, like Apple and Google are like diametrically opposed. And they work with intelligence and design in very different ways. But I was in deep grief. And part of the reason I had to leave Apple was I had no idea how to metabolize. Like, grief is an enzyme for metabolizing all of the human experience that you've encountered. I had no idea how to do that within the frame of that role, that body, the person that we didn't have like beginning and new where I could be like, with this cup of tea, I'm a new person. Like, okay, who am I now? So I almost had to like shed all of that to just come to meet myself again. And so, you know, I was like, okay, new job, new thing, new place. And a year into being at Google, Thầy and like 20, this like retinue, this like Jedi brown river of monastics come to Google, of all places. I wrote a piece about it called Sometimes the Zen Master Comes to You. And I had practice at that time. I had desperately clutched for practice and things to help me through that moment. And Steve himself had a great deal of practice, and some of his practice was alive in the conversation at Apple. But forgive me, I feel like I'm really going on now, but I will bring it home. And Thầy came to Google, and I remember it was this moment where we were all seated around one of those like Dr. Strangelove tables where there's like the technology that never works in the middle, and then all of the Google people were on one side and all of the monastics were on the other, and I was like fortuitously positioned right in the seat where none of the Google people could see me and all of the monastics could see me. And Thầy was sitting there like a mountain, thundering silence in the middle of it. And I think we were supposed to talk that day about like how to make technology mindful, and I don't remember anything in that conversation because I cried the entire time. I just liquefied. And I didn't know what was happening, and I didn't know why. And I remember, the only thing I do remember in that conversation was I was like, I feel like I'm on the wrong side of the room. And it took me a decade, actually, to come here to Plum Village last year. The practice found me, and I took in what I could take in. But the other day when we were speaking of like how long it takes for some of these seeds to be properly watered and to grow, they can take a long time. It's like there's that story of the magnolia seed that like was thousands of years old and then was, brought out of a seed bank and watered and grew. And it's like the patience of that seed. But I mention all of this because when I founded Google Empathy Lab a year later, after that encounter with everyone, I started it because the models of intelligence require us to include all of that. And prior to that, I didn't know how to include it. I didn't know how to make space for that. I didn't know how to walk through the door of the room or go to the whiteboard or start to have a conversation about the science or the methodology or the practicum. I didn't know how to do that without like accidentally shedding 98% of myself. And that 96% that we don't understand is the part we must include for any of the science to be true, for any of anything to be true or real or useful. And so I feel like it's such an endeavor to come alongside and for me as a designer, to make things for people, but to make so much space for all of the things that I could never understand and could never know, and all of the people who carry the experiences and the ancestors that hold all of those kind of wild multitudes. And I feel like that is so much of the practice of like what you would never think is part of AI, but in fact, if we're going to model intelligence, is the only way to make something that's actually intelligent. Okay. Thank you so much for your patient listening in that big ramble. Sometimes I'm haiku. That was super Hemingway.
Ooh, thank you, Danielle. Could we have a sound of the bell so we can digest all of that? It was wonderful, wonderful sharing. I'm a little bit picking up from this retreat too. There's a curiosity in how to integrate spirituality and science, and I think some of us are quite lucky that we are able to bring those questions and like make our work about that, and to integrate it and like you have just shared, Danielle, how you, when you founded the Empathy Lab, then you questions, including the 96%, including spirituality and things like that, into your daily work, your actual work. And I think, Jorge, yesterday in our conversation, you said something that really struck me. You said, we can't really expect science to fulfill all of our needs, including spirituality. So how do you navigate that? How are you bringing your work? And when you feel like you cannot bring spirituality in your work, maybe, or can you name the reasons why you can't, or you feel, the obstacles that you can't? And when you can't, how do you find that, or not to expect science to be able to do that? Or is that an even good division? I keep the science separate. I keep my spirituality and spirituality separate. Something like that.
Yes, I think there are different ways, because obviously it is very hard to, and I think it doesn't feel well to have kind of different faces for different places. But at the same time, for me it is relevant to realize what I can ask from different people, from different situations, or do not expect one aspect of my life fulfill every expectation. So I think it allows for a wider possibilities. So I have a grandson, I expect him to smile, and that's enough. And trying to do not expect, for example, my research in physics to provide me answer on why I am happy today or I'm suffering, because, okay, I don't think this is the right place. It's like when you want to buy something, you need to go to the proper shop to do that. And so I think this is one part, but at the same time I'm resonating with many things you have said, which are really amazing. And one of these is, we have a huge program we have been running for 17 years now, with about more than 2,000 children in Mexico, doing a science workshop. And they come from they can keep doing that for many years till go to university. And one of the things some pedagogues even say that you can show some challenge and the children will realize what is behind that. But in my experience, when you show something, for example, you put some objects on water and try to see why some of them float and some go to the bottom, the possibilities of seeing different things are infinite. So this is so in my experience, when you want to obtain some kind of observation, you need to help the children to direct their attention to very specific aspect and forget about all the other aspects. And this is very challenging when you see we update and there are so many different things we can see. So obviously I agree, I follow your idea that the attention is very important, but it is not at all obvious in a given situation where your attention should go. And I think this is the other part, because I think we learn that from our environment, meaning the parents, the school, the community. We learn to see in some ways, and it is really difficult to open it, to be able to see in a different way. And at the same time, this is some worry, because I have become a user of artificial intelligence, as probably many people, and research it is incredibly useful. But at the same time, I think there is the risk that you end up having only one voice, which is this biases, consensus driven by the powerful and the elites, and which is related what you said about why you need the validation of science. Because science is a community of which holds power about knowledge. And this is not natural. And there are other knowledge which are not in the European Western tradition of the universities, which are not called science because the colonialism happened, and it makes this mark. So, and this is incredibly present in artificial intelligence, in at least even at the statistic, because what is inside the internet feeding the artificial intelligence is not uniform. So I see all these challenges. How do we decide what we see, and how do we manage the danger that artificial intelligence ends up giving more and more power for the powerful and less power and less space for the other things which are not inside this course?
I also want to follow up on something that Danielle said was very important, that the founding of the Empathy Lab, it was, you had to let go of 98% of what you knew or something, and that was a very scary thing to do, very fearful. And I think as well, Mark, you mentioned about fear being the greatest obstacle to updating your system or something like that. And I wonder if, the separation between bringing spirituality, the kind of resistance, you can say, or the thinking behind it, bringing spirituality into science, the fears, if that is fear-driven, and how do you personally handle? Can you give some examples of how you handle your own fears? I think, Mark also, if you could give an example of maybe the model that you presented and like your real life application of that, a story that kind of demonstrates it really alive for us. Yeah.
Fighting about who wants to hear who speak. I think Jorge brings out one of the beautiful faces of this dialectic, which is not everything needs to be everything. You learn that when you get married, I think. Your partner shouldn't be everything. I think that's a dead end. You need friends and coaches and other things in your life. The other side of that coin, though, another face, the one that's relevant for me, is that I had the benefit of being scared out of my early path. I was the first thing I did was I owned a business that did marketing and advertising, and I was making lots of money, and then I got very, very sick. I got sick, I think, because I was using my superpower for the dark side, which is I can sell, baby. And now I sell positive ideas, which is a better fit for me. Now I talk about empathy and wisdom, but I'm really good. I'm really good at that thing. And I got sick, and I got scared. I got scared out of that path because I got sick sort of onto death, and I got scared. I got scared out of that path, and I got scared badly enough that I got out of business and sold all my stuff and dusted my sandals off and hit the road. And then I spent the next 10 years practicing overseas, doing many long retreats. And one of the things that emerged, not everybody gets that chance. I feel so fortunate that my spiritual path was so easy. Being sick onto death as the starting of a spiritual path sounds hard, but it's very easy, because then the alternative is no kind of alternative, right? That's actually the easy way. That's the light way. There's no moderateness. There's like, die if you do this or do something else. And I could hear the wisdom of existence saying, make a decision now. You can pursue this and you'll end soon, or you can do something else. And I said, please, God, let me do something else. And because that was the starting place, I take every step. I try in my life to take every step with that spirit alive in me. So the only reason I'm doing what I do now is because the universe put it on my path to do, and I have faith. I have faith in the whole. So I went back to school to study consciousness and self. Unsurprising if you're a Buddhist practitioner, because I wanted to see what do other people think about what is consciousness, what is self, can we study this? Is there something interesting in the academy as well as on the mat? And that just progressed spontaneously into a cognitive science degree, because then I kept bumping into the brain. I was like, well, that's weird, I gotta know something about the brain. And then just one thing after another, and I could just feel life putting one stone in front of the other. And so, in a way, I have a non-dual approach to this, or a unified approach to this, where I don't care about ladder climbing. I don't really care if I persist at any of the academies I'm in right now. I care only that the next thing I do is the thing that's given, and I do it with all of my heart, and I bring my whole self to it. And so in that way, my job and my science is my spiritual path. And it means that I'm a very weird professor at the university. I thinly veil really thin. I'm mostly talking about Jesus and Buddha in neuroscience classes. I get great reviews, so they keep hiring me to do more. I think that's because we're hungry. We're hungry for this, and the students can feel it, but I try not to do any research that I don't think will have a positive impact on the world, and I don't teach a course. I don't ever get up and say anything to any young person unless I think it's gonna have a positive impact on their life to some degree. So yeah, I teach cognitive science, but really I'm teaching how to be a whole human, and we're gonna use the metaphor of cognitive science to discover that. And so I think that's very possible. Think about fear, and then I'll hand on the mic. But for any aspiring academics out there who are hearing that and thinking that's there's a little bit of inspiration in that, maybe I could bring my practice life closer to it. I think the major block is fear, and for me anyway. And I'm incredibly privileged to let go. But and this actually comes right out of the science I'm doing right now too, about the benefit of non-zero sum versus zero sum aims. Do you know that? Do you know those terms? Zero sum is like, I want a Ferrari, because they only make a limited number. So if you get one, I can't get one. And if I get it, you can't have it. That's a zero sum aim. The science is showing if you put zero sum aims up front and center, it's a recipe for disaster in terms of mental health over the long run. It can help in the short term, but over the long run, it doesn't work very well. And if you can put a non-zero sum aim up front, you can have zero sum aims as satellite aims, right? So I mean to say, and I think CEOs know this today, right? Well, we can ask. You don't aim, it may be more optimal to aim at something like, I want to be really good at this job, or I want to be really compassionate, I want to be of great service, I want this to be an opportunity to become wise. That's a non-zero sum aim. It doesn't matter how wise I get, you can still be maximally wise. I'm not taking all the love out of the room. I can be serviceable, and you can be also like as serviceable as you can be. That's a non-zero sum game. Taking that as the central one is really, really good for your mental health over the long run, in part because it's socially encouraging rather than socially antagonistic. And you can approach academia, and you can approach science with that if you're brave enough. You can take the dolphin path instead of the shark path. So I give away first name authorship like it's going out of business. I just give it away. If there's a young person on my team, I just give them first name authorship. You take it. You take it, you get the name. I'm happy to give away my ideas, because what I'm aiming at isn't success as a scientist. I'm primarily aiming at liberation. And I do science because it's the thing to do. It's the thing. If I was a butcher, I would butcher. And if I was a farmer, I would farm. I'm an academic, so academy. But it's just the thing. It's just the thing that I'm doing. And you can actually do it like that. And not to blow my own horn, but we talk about this later, but I publish a lot, I'm very successful at this thing, and the reason is because everybody wants me on their team. Because if you have Dharma up front, you're awesome on a science team. You're generous and compassionate and caring and attentive and careful and conscientious. Who doesn't want that guy on their team, right? So if you can be brave enough to bring these things together, then I find actually it's been career moving for me anyway, so I'm going to continue to do that. And I don't know where it goes, right? Who knows? I'll have to see if it continues to work, but it's worked so far.
So, sister, you were asking about the how, which I appreciate as we're all practitioners. So it's what is the practice of integrating? And one of the ways I work with that is it's always easy when you're storytelling something in retrospect. It sounds like it all makes sense and like all the dots connect. But to be completely honest, I didn't know I'd founded the Empathy Lab until a year later. And the entire time I was at Google, which was 11 years, I left a couple of years ago because the work needed to leave. But the entire time I worked there, I was like, this is going to be the thing where they fire me. I kept doing things that I was convinced were inconsistent with the system. But they felt like the right, or the interesting, or the juicy, or the heartful thing to do. And they didn't so many times. I was like, wow, okay. I was certain. And I feel like just the act of saying, you're asking me to answer this question. I'll answer that question, but I'm going to do it in this way. Will you trust me? And in the beginning, they trusted me because I was like the apple girl. But I feel like it's really just a question of where is one foot on solid ground and how is the other foot, kind of like Avalokiteshvara, is on one foot on the cushion, one foot out in the world, like springing into action. It's how to have one foot in solid ground. Speaking about neuroscience, I'd go into a room and be like, we're going to talk about feelings. Don't worry, I got you. We're going to talk science. And it's kind of how are you moving in a way where people can follow to the uncomfortable place. And speaking into uncomfortable places, what I found myself often doing was creating spaces where, and this is like not rocket science, everyone in this room knows this, I'm just the one whose mouth it's coming out of. You create a space where it's okay for people to say, I have no idea. Like my boss, a computational neuroscientist, this genius-y person, I went to him when I first started working in intelligence, and I said, okay, so I feel like if I'm designing these prototypes, I should really understand how this thing works. Like, I'm a little embarrassed to say it in a room full of engineers, but can you like walk me through how this whole thing works? And he was like, I have no idea. And it was like, okay, great. So also like, really, what? And it's the beautiful thing about folks that have spent like 40 years doing quantum physics is when you say, I don't know, I can be like, it's totally cool, I don't know. It's not that there's some deep insufficiency in me. It's not that I have a crippling inability to do cursory mathematics. It's not that it's like speaking to the stories we tell ourselves and beliefs matter. Sometimes when we encounter a moment where we don't know the answer, we feel like it's revealing the fact that we have no idea who we are or what we're talking about, or like basically that we are dumb or something. And so what's so lovely about being in a room where people say, I don't know, but let's figure it out together. I had a sister in Dharma sharing yesterday who, in an incredibly courageous moment, in an incredibly violent circumstance, said exactly that. And it changes everything. And so I feel like in my history as well, the spaces where it's the Sangha moment. It's the Sangha of I don't know. Being able to talk about the things that we do know. And I feel like this is the other thing, not just in science, but in so many spaces, if you've done something long enough, you're supposed to know what you're talking about. You're supposed to be a subject matter expert. You're supposed to be imparting. You're supposed to be transmitting. You're supposed to hold something down. And so the ability to put that down and say, well, of course, these are the things we know, or these are the things that we intuit, but to make space for all kinds of ways of sensing and feeling and knowing, but also to say, let's just figure it out together. Let's let it emerge from the space between. I feel like has put me in rooms where I've found myself giving a presentation about, for instance, youth mental health, growth mindset, and how to work with kind of interstitial technologies to provide interventions. And that's like really crunchy stuff. But what happens when you have that conversation, but you're open, even just in like vibe, not even in explicit expression, what I found is the conversations that really changed the work weren't the ones that happened in that room. They were the conversations where people would come up to me afterwards, like the most hardened executives would be like, that thing you were saying about kids and the ocean of emotion, can you walk me through that? Because my teenage son is really struggling right now. And it was like the personal things that showed up in between, in the interstices of the work. I felt like that was my real job. My seeming job was like empathy lab lady or AI lady. But really the job was all of that deep listening and all of that deep looking and just being a person who felt like someone that people could come to and be like, I feel like I need to take a medical leave, but I'm really freaked out because my boss, blah, 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 blah. And so kind of being the empty bowl for me was the practice of the work. It was making a space either explicitly by having, like, raising my hand and saying, we have a Sangha here, like, we will practice together, and then letting whatever arises, like making space for that literally, but just being a spacious presence where everything else could find a place to live. I feel like I had way more meetings that were not about the work than about the work. But that was how I watched the work completely change, was because it was attending to the person who had a question they couldn't ask anywhere else. And then I watched their work shift. All this incredible work came out of people that came to me thinking they wanted to ask me how to change their research discussion guide. And then actually we would have a conversation about the people they were going to be speaking with. And then the entire guide would change because the conversation wanted to be a different kind of conversation. So it's always this widening the aperture in whatever form. And I found that for me too, it was such a deep relief because then I got to be in that space as well. I didn't have to be some performative blah blah who was supposed to. I never feel like I know what I'm talking about, including right now.
Well, thank you so much for this very rich conversation this morning with our three panelists. Please, flowers. In the monastery, we don't clap, but this is our acknowledgement and celebration. So if you are interested in opening the aperture, widening the aperture more, our three panelists will be available at lunchtime under the oak trees. If you wish to follow any threads of this conversation, I know we're almost out of time. It was I felt it was a very rich conversation, and I learned so much also this morning. I really wanted to follow up with questions and say more, but I know that we have walking meditation at 11:30, so I will refrain myself as well right now. And so for any of you who wish to follow up, please meet at under the oak tree. And
I was just going to say my 5-year-old daughter will probably join us as well. And in terms of insight, she probably has more valid answers than I.
So just gratitude to our panelists for this wonderful conversation on how the way, how we see things affect our work, our personal life, our what we do in the world. So please enjoy 3 sounds of the bell. And just allow everything we have heard, we have seen this morning to land somewhere in our consciousness. It will, in its own way, produce many fruits and flowers in the upcoming days.